Welcome, welcome, welcome to this month's Deal Clinic Live. We have a corker of an episode today. So today's is the December special, and we have none other than our very own CEO, Chris Dowty, chatting with the property professional, Mr. Simon Zutshi. Now, they're going to touch on how they met and also why they continue to nurture and maintain this relationship. They're also going to touch on some really important aspects such as regulation and compliance. Let's head over to the conversation now.
So welcome everybody. And I don't think I really need to do much of an introduction, but Simon is joining me today for a casual conversation between friends, business partners, and just doing a nice little Christmas special. So welcome, Simon.
So I should have had my Christmas Santa hat on, really, but yeah, welcome, Chris, and thank you for asking me.
I should really.
On Christmas special. Maybe we can get them put on with AI later or something. You know.
I know. Well, sure. You never know these days with a bit of AI. But yes, it was just a casual conversation for sort of half an hour, just to sort of change it up, because everybody's, used to the normal, Q&A with some kind of promotion or whatever. And we just thought, let's do something a little bit different. And so
just nothing being promoted.
So we've got a few little questions, a couple for Simon. Simon's got a few for me, which we've sort of thrown over to him. But, from your perspective, mate, if you could sort of tell everybody, how we first met and from your perspective, what's led you to decide, to work with Sourcing Investments and the company that I established and run?
Yeah. Okay. So I was thinking about this actually, and I think this just goes to show the power of networking. Right. We get so many people, we're inundated by people saying, oh, can you promote this? Can you promote that? I've got this great thing for investors. And some of them are truly amazing. Some of them are just rubbish and never going to go anywhere, really. And I think maybe you had reached out, and I have a PA who's supposed to vet everyone and stop people getting to me, basically gatekeeper. And I don't think you had much success getting through. You're just on the list of various people to call. However, then I believe through one of your business partners who you set Sourcing Investors up with, knew one of my business partners, which is Mike Bristow. And Mike said, hey, I know this guy. They've got this thing. You should really have a chat to them. So when you get a personal recommendation from someone, you then say, oh, okay, I rate that person. I'm going to listen, and I'm so pleased I did. So I think it's probably thanks to Mike that we actually finally connected, I believe.
Yeah, no, it was, and I couldn't agree more. In actual fact, the older and grayer and the more experienced and traumatized I get in life, is definitely what you just said there. It is what you know for sure, but then to a certain level that opens some doors. But with the networking piece, that was a great example. You can knock and go direct and try the LinkedIn stuff, but really the power of actually somebody, I guess, half vouching for you actually allows you to open that door. But then once that door is open or half open, you've then got to actually, we wouldn't be here today if the value proposition wasn't there. There wasn't a dual benefit either way. So
when you then sat down and explained what you're doing, I thought, hey, this is a really good service, because I know it's changed a little bit. Back in the early days, it seemed to me that you had a great place, a network, a marketplace, if you like, where people who are finding deals who don't want them themselves, who want to sell them to other people, can put them on that platform, and investors who maybe don't want to find properties. And I know we have an increasing number of overseas investors, especially since COVID, where a lot of stuff went digital and Zoom, etc. So we have a lot of overseas investors, and Sourcing Investments provides a platform where those two can connect. And I know the model's changed quite a bit, but the fact that everything was on the platform, the fact that you could communicate with each other, the fact that you had escrow accounts, the whole monies and things, it was a well thought out solution to the problem about how do people invest remotely, how do people work with deal sourcers, because as you and I know, unfortunately, many deal sourcers don't know what they're doing. You have to be very, very careful. Many of them are not regulated. You're always innovating. You've come up with the compliance vaults. People can now get compliant, and that's what I like about it, Chris. Obviously you're a smart cookie, but you keep on adding and improving to the product, and that's what you need to do, because things change and you've got to evolve, you've got to adapt. And that's one of the reasons I like working with you, Chris.
I appreciate that, and I guess that sort of leads on to a really nice question, which is post training with PIN, you've got obviously people coming through wanting to, ultimately make either a shift in their life or business, or move from one industry to another and actually sort of take some self-control, which is where obviously the training and the network comes from in order to support that, facilitate. So whether they're themselves wanting to be investors, or whether they actually sort of slightly change their desire to be actually becoming an agent or a facilitator in investing. So what just describe to everybody what typically happens next from your understanding, whether they're an investor or a potential agent of facilitation, whether it be property, sourcer, or whether it's any other sort of service around the industry. What challenges do they have after they've come through a PIN environment?
Yeah, so obviously PIN is one of many companies out there who train people. And because we've been around such a long time, set up in 2003, and we're still going, I think that longevity speaks for itself. If we weren't doing a good job, we wouldn't still be here. And it's amazing how many property trainers come and go within a couple of years, because they come in, big social media presence, and maybe they've been successful themselves and think, oh, I'm going to teach other people how to do this or coach them. And then they realize that there's a big difference between doing it yourself and being able to get that learning and transfer to other people. So I think a lot of people come off training, whether it's PIN or someone else's, and they feel then a bit lost. I like to think our training, we really encourage them to take action, because education alone, although it's important, it's not enough. You've got to actually implement that education. And when you're out there in the trenches, at the coalface, on your own, it can be very, very lonely. And sometimes people might find a really good deal, but talk themselves out of it because they think it's too good to be true. Or sometimes people do not so good deals. And ultimately what happens, Chris, tragically, most people don't do anything. And so, and there are a number of reasons why. One of the biggest problems, which one of the ones that you help fix, is people think, well, I can't find deals. Now, I believe there are deals everywhere. I believe it doesn't matter what's happening in the market. There's always going to be motivated sellers, and most sellers are not motivated. So we want to find the ones that truly are, maybe only 5%. But if you find them, help them, and understand what their problem is and come up with an ethical solution, we can get a really good deal. The problem is most people either, if they've not been trained by us, don't know how to do that properly, or can't be bothered to do that, or they try. A real problem, Chris, is the microwave society. People want instant results. They're not prepared to put in time and effort, and they dabble. They treat someone like a part-time hobby, and they wonder why they don't get results. And so after a few attempts, and they probably know what to do, they just haven't actually implemented and executed very well. They think this is too hard. And so that's why the idea of getting a sourcer to come and bring a property to them seems far more appealing. As I said, the problem, the most sourcers don't know what they're doing. So the fact that all your sourcers have been compliant, and what that means is they've had to register. And a lot of, if a sourcer says, you ask a sourcer, are you compliant? They say, what do you mean? Run a mile. Okay. So the fact they've gone through that process is a good indication. And then you have things like your deal clinics where you're actually helping your source to understand what makes a good deal. So you're providing support to help the sourcers become better, which means that people, whether you're a sourcer, that's good. But if people want to come and buy a deal, hopefully, and are exceptions, but hopefully most of the deals on the platform should be fairly good because they're found by good sources. And I think that's really some of the problems you solve. Of course, you always need to do your own due diligence. Don't take anyone's word for it. But if someone's gone in and negotiated a good deal rather than just, oh, this is on Rightmove, they've actually gone in, met the owner, negotiated, maybe even secured it on an option, then you're talking, then you've got some leverage there, and it's justifiable to pay them a fee to give you that deal.
So if I was going to summarize it, the challenge is really is actually that taking action, and then that, what I would call that hit in your stomach, where when something's new and yet you have the, what I would call knowledge and education, actually taking that step really is difficult. I've been there, and it is hard. Even now when I'm doing deals, there's still that doubt that creeps in, the little voice of what about this, what about that? And I think it never goes away, but what you end up doing is from my perspective, is you listen to it, because actually having that little voice sometimes just makes you that little bit more due diligent on whether it is
Absolutely.
actually real or
Yeah.
not. But there comes a point where you've got to do something.
Yeah, you're right. That little voice there is to stop you making silly mistakes. The only problem is sometimes that little voice is a bit too loud and stops you actually taking action. And this is one of the reasons that people love our coaching that we do, because by being able to sound check your deals against the coach, and they're never going to tell you should do a deal or not. It's obviously your decision, but that helps the reassurance and gives you the confidence to move forward when it's a good deal. And when it's not a good deal, actually they can ask you questions so you work out it's not a good deal. And I sometimes say to my mastermind students, it's not just about the deals you do, it's the deals you don't do that you would have done if you're on your own and maybe made some expensive mistakes. Because I don't know about you, Chris, but I've made some silly mistakes over the years just because I didn't know what I didn't know. At the time, it seemed like a great deal. You know, back in the mid 2000s when we were buying no money down and we could get off-plan properties at a 15-20% discount, no money, and even cash out sometimes, snap, buying all those properties. And then you think, bit of hindsight, and maybe they weren't such good deals in the end, you know. So but that, if you've got a lot of properties and if someone's honest, they're going to have some lemons in that portfolio. Anyone tells you they've never made mistakes, either they're lying or they're just kidding themselves, right?
Yeah, without a doubt. But it's the same old thing in life. I think it's one of these things where it's the mitigation of risk, and risk comes through knowledge and experience. And experience that you cannot buy, you actually have to either leverage mentors or others. Does that make sense? Who have what's the word, made those pitfalls. And it doesn't necessarily mean you're gonna not do them yourself, but at least it's somebody saying, hey, look, I did this and this happened. So just be aware. And that's what allows, I guess, people to be able to become a little bit more efficient with their success criteria.
It's one of the challenges with some of these new property trainers who prop up, right? Because as you say, when you want someone coaching you, mentoring you, guiding you, training you, you want to make sure they've got a breadth of experience, not just the successes, but also the things that have gone wrong and the mistakes they've made, so you don't have to make mistakes. And if someone's fairly new to the industry, the problem is they just don't have enough time in the industry. They don't have enough worldly experience to understand what the mistakes are. So one of the reasons you get people popping up and being trainers for a couple of years is they'll get a few people who are successful, but they'll also get some people who most people don't do a lot. And there's some people who do stuff, but because they haven't had the right guidance, they make expensive mistakes and they start blaming the mentor. And it's not really the mentor's fault, but it's just the mentor's lack of experience. Does that make sense? So you've got to be very, very careful whenever you do training or mentoring or coaching. You've got to be very careful who you pick to work with.
And also, it's just very hard to actually validate it. That's the problem. Somebody tells you all this, it's very hard to validate. And that unfortunately comes through what I would call, genuine reputation. Actually, people have been through the program to actually sort of vouch for it. Because as I say, verification of what people now say online, whether it be social media or to your face, unfortunately.
The best way to check.
Yeah.
The best way to, if any, not just as any other training you want to do, right? The best thing to do is go and find people who've actually done the training, not someone who's a keyboard warrior with an opinion, because there are some people who are very anti-training, some are very pro-training, but someone who's actually invested the money, done the time, done the training, and ask them, what results did you get? Were you happy with the results? Were you happy with the training? And some of those people said, yes, amazing, achieved life more than I achieved. Somebody say, well, I didn't get quite what I wanted, but that's because I didn't take action. So you got to understand if they didn't get results, why was that? And then also say, can you tell me about some other people? Because everyone's experience is different. You could have two people in exactly the same training and they get different results, right? So I would definitely ask around, get word of mouth recommendation, do your due diligence, and speak to people who've actually done training. Because too many people I meet, they say, oh, I've trained with X and I wish I'd found you first. And they just went to the first people they found and they didn't do the research, didn't do due diligence. So please always do your due diligence.
Yeah. Now I think you've got a nice little question for me, I believe.
I have, Chris. So look, I mean, obviously we've been around a long time and we were recommended, kind of personally recommended to each other, but why does Sourcing Investments want to work with someone like Pin? What do you get out of it? What's the benefits for you?
Yeah, so for me, on the flip side, with regard to what I would call reputation, really, that is the only currency that's worthwhile in this world, and that's on a personal front, and that is definitely from as a business owner, and you'll probably absolutely agree with this. It's a representation and extension of yourself, whether it be your ethics template, how you are, how you operate, and for me, who you actually do business with. we can sit here and the brain is quite, and this is from experience, you will do either, relationships or business with people for money. For money only. And you can sit there all day long saying, I did this because of this, but I didn't, listen to the red flags or the warning signs. And I think one of the things, especially in the property industry in the UK and just any industry anywhere, it's quite a small world. And when you get into it, it is very much about who you do business with. And if you have an idea, which, I always take a very long-term view in my businesses. And, we've been around, 8 years now, from concept through to execution. And who I do business with, I have learned the hard way, where you either get burnt or you spend a lot of time, or your team does, and a lot of money, and nothing comes out of it. And so really, I took the stance very long time ago, is if I smell anything wrong at all with it doesn't matter what the money is coming in from it. It really doesn't, because that is going to burn you long term. And with other, property training organizations, which, I have been associated with in the past, they have had their time and we've learned the hard way. I think ultimately, mate, and I'm saying this genuinely for anybody, watching this now, I have spent, some personal time with Simon, and it's not just what he says, it's actually, sitting down, what's the energy vibe, what's he saying when, when he's telling you something with his eyes, etc. And these are all the indicators that, you learn from, being 46 years old, and, it comes from a genuine place. And ultimately, look, if you can sit there and say, look, we're going to do our best in this relationship, I think that counts for a lot in this world where it's all short term, fast turnaround. They want the silver bullet. I'm willing to make, $5,000 today instead of 20 grand tomorrow, is the mindset we come across so much in this game. And unfortunately, people get hurt. And so that's why I'm here today, because I have had, again, offers of working with other organizations. And I'm sorry, even from our perspective, I've turned it down, number one. And number two, I haven't actively reached out to some of them because I know what the end result will be. And I'm sorry to say, this world is, if you add value and you do it in the right ethical way, I'm sorry to say that value that you bring will turn into revenue and profit. But if you go the other way around, you'll get burned, and that association will never leave you. That's the problem.
Well, thank you, Chris. I'll take that compliment. And that's, as I said, I think that speaks for our longevity, right? You can't be around this long if you're not doing some good stuff. And I think that is the key. And I think anyone listening to this, if you're in business, this is a really, really important message that we're talking about here. And obviously you need to bring revenue into the business. Cash flow is really important, but you've got to really think about, if you're in business for the long term, and why wouldn't you be? Why would you just do stuff short term? You've got to think about reputation. You've got to think about credibility, because your name is everything. It's 22 years to build something, you could lose it in 5 minutes, right? And like you, Chris, I've had lots of people over the years approach me with, they want me to sell properties and things like this, and I just don't think some of those things are good deals. And I could have made far more money selling properties and getting commissions for that from developers and things than I do training. And we do very well training, by the way, because we get great results from people. It could make a lot more, but I made a deliberate decision not to do that. And in the very early days, let's say in the mid 2000s, we started in 2003, I was buying lots of property. I was buying off-plan properties, and I realized that if I bought more than one property from a developer, we can get some good deals. And so I did that. And in early days, we did start to do a few properties to people. And then when it got to about 2007, a price was so high at that point, I realized these don't stack up. So we just stopped selling, because we thought that these are no longer good investments. And although we probably had a big potential loss of income there, I thought it's not worth it. I want to be here a long time. And maybe then I didn't realize that I'd still be here right now, but because I get bored. I like to change things, really. So I can't believe I've been doing this 22 years, but that is because I've not been a short-term thinker. And in today's society, too many people are short-term, instant gratification. If you want long-term value, if you want long-term wealth creation, you need to think and act long-term. And as I said right at the beginning, we said, how do we meet? Network, relationships, it's all about that. And after all, property is a people business. And in the business where sometimes things don't always work, I always I always try and leave relationships where I've had partnership with things that haven't worked. Okay, we'll just go our separate ways, or try not to, have any acrimonious feelings, because you never know when you're going to meet someone again in this world. It's a very, very small world. I've only got, I think, one relationship that was very acrimonious, and that's because a guy just took the piss and seemed to think he could take advantage of my good nature. And so, and I've done a lot of work with a lot of people, really. So I think that's not a bad ratio. And there's always going to be some idiots out there, right? Here's the reality. But we can only do our best to do the right thing. And as you started saying, chasing the money is sometimes not the right thing. You got to always think, how are you adding value to someone? And that, whether that's a seller you're speaking to, whether it's your tenants, whether it's a retiring landlord, letting agent, whatever, customer in your business, how can you add value? If you could add value to them, revenue will come after that in any business.
Without a doubt. And I can say it's not worth it. It's not worth the stress. It's not worth the anxiety when you sat there at 11 o'clock at night sweating because you're wondering if you're going to get, what's the word, shanked, if that kind of makes sense from a business perspective. It's not worth it. So doing it with people, and your actual network will be a lot smaller, but you know what? It'll be a lot more effective, and you'll get better results. So, so Simon, from both investors and agents' perspective, obviously you've come across a lot through the trainings, etc. So just to sort of describe, what problems, and it's all about problems and solutions, but what for you does SI actually solve for PIN, and how does that partnership create value for you?
Yeah, well, so there's a couple of different ways actually you help us. First of all, we do have training about deal sourcing. We don't sell any deals ourselves. So having somewhere that people who do our training can then go and sell their deals on a platform, that's an obvious benefit, because you're just an add-on. And that's why we recommend people come to you, because it's an add-on service that we don't do, that you feel very niche in. We don't really want to do that, but so that's a great thing. Also, as I say, you're always innovating. You came up with that insurance that property investors need to have just to protect themselves. So that kind of innovation. Also, the fact you have your compliance vault where people can get certified and compliant as a deal. So you've got things that we don't do that complement our training. So it's not competing, it just all complements. That's why I recommend you. We have overseas investors who we teach them how to find deals themselves, obviously, but sometimes they prefer to work with deal sources, people on the ground. Again, that's an introduction we can make to your deal sources. And then finally, flipping it on its head, because you always want to have a two-way relationship. You have lots of customers who are interested in property, and we have training. And so actually you're one of our affiliates. We have great training. You tell our clients about it, and then we do pay you a commission for that, as we will to anyone who introduces people. And so it's a symbiotic relationship, I think.
Yeah, and it always has to be, and I appreciate that, because, like I said, our relationship has been, quite a number of years now, to be honest. And again, actions speak louder than words, and it's vice versa, And I will say this, when there is referral, to be paid, that is paid, and I know that we do the other way around. For example, when clients on board, and we know it's coming from PIN. And those little things, I don't care whether it's £50, I don't care whether it's, multiple thousands, whatever it may be. The action of those paying relative to the deal that's been done over a period of time starts really building that trust. And that, unfortunately, I've realized in this industry, doesn't happen very often consistently.
No. And it's like an energy transfer, isn't it? Sometimes people just mutually refer each other, and there's no commissions and things, and that some people have that relation, that's fine. But I think just having there's a bit of an energy transfer, and it just helps the whole relationship, if that makes sense.
Without a doubt, and it's adding complementary value to both sides, of both the investors and agents. And I think sort of the final thing I think you mentioned just before we were having a little chit chat off camera, as they say, was with the budget and also Renters Reform Act, etc. Sort of final question is regulation is increasing and the market in the UK is evolving. Do you agree, with the more regulation and market commentary around agents and investors? That's number one. And then the second part is, you've already mentioned it, but around what I would call the amount of regulation, and for both investors and agents, we've got a couple of products which you talked about the innovation, and I think the biggest thing now is more regulation, therefore protection is even more important around business protocols, what you're doing. So yeah, just you agree with the regulation, and more importantly, how you can be protected.
Yeah. So first of all, I think regulation is a good thing generally, because I think otherwise it's a bit of a wild west. And so bringing regulations in, you raise standards, you improve things. So that's good in principle. However, typically when you get civil servants and politicians interfering in an industry they don't really understand, they often overcompensate, use your sledgehammer to crack a nut kind of scenario. And so the renters' rights bill, which was actually the Labour version of the renters' reform bill initially presented by the Conservative Party, was about levelling up and about making landlords more professional in their business. And I completely agree with that. No longer can you treat your investing as a hobby. Even if it's part-time, you need to treat it like a business. I completely agree with that. They have gone way too far in the favor of tenants. And I think part of that is also political, trying to win favor of tenants, because there are more tenants voters than there are landlords. I think some of it's political, to be honest. So that's the first thing. And things like Section 24 that came in back in April 2017, which is where if you own property in your own name and you're a high rate taxpayer and you have mortgages, you pay a lot more tax. This last budget that's just come out, it's very clear that HMRC is after you. HMRC wants your money. And interesting, a lot of the main taxes didn't change, but there were still 92 announcements and 40 tax changes. And it seems to me that there's a lot more regulation, there's a lot more reporting, there's a lot more having to provide information. And if you don't do that, then you get penalized. So, late accounts filing was £100. That's now doubled to £200. Things like if you have cryptocurrency, by the way, there's now a new form on the personal tax return that you need to fill in. And that needs to be done by January 26th. And if you don't, guess what? They're sharing lots of information on platforms. They'll say, why didn't you tell us about that? And I bet there'll be penalties. So there are so many more. So rather than just taxes, I think they're introducing a lot more regulation, and those people who don't know what they're doing, who are not up to speed, will get caught out on fines. And so to that point, things like insurance, protecting yourself is really, really important. And we know as landlords, we have to have landlord insurance, which has an element of public liability insurance. Someone falls over in your property, and not as well as insurance the property. But actually, especially people like deal sourcers, well, you need to have professional indemnity insurance. If you make a mistake, someone might try to sue you. And in this litigious state we live in, and that comes from America and ambulance chasers, so there's going to be a lot more of that happening. For example, one of the things in the renters' rights bill is the rent repayment orders. Now, currently, it's 12 months, right? And as Rachel Reeves found out, if you don't have your license on your property, up to 12 months rent can be claimed back by the tenant. That's going to 24 months. And sometimes this is something that it doesn't actually materially affect the tenant and their enjoyment of that property at all. It's just technical regulation thing that actually is a money-making thing for local councils to raise rent. So that's what frustrates me, where policies come in where it's all about making money, it's all about control, and does nothing to improve standards. It's just trying to be oppressing totalitarian state. And welcome 1982.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. It's the level of what I would call professionalism protection that is now needed. Does that make sense? Just to operate, logic doesn't necessarily prevail now. It's actually having to know the regulation and how it operates. And and I think what we touched upon is, one for agents, sourcing agents, we've got the compliance vault, which does all of that, including legal contracts, to actually make sure that when they're working with clients that is done well. And then on the flip side, the new innovation is the investor shield, which is then protecting investors operating in the market as well. And we've launched that a few months ago. We've had a really, really nice, ramp up with clients actually seeing that, as a value add. And I wish, I could sit here and say, oh, regulation is completely, needed and required, when I actually am sat here in Indonesia, where I'm the one trying to implement regulation. It sounds as though it's like a It's like a complete 360 of where I've gone through, because here there really isn't much at all, and it actually needs. So it's the market that the UK is. It has a lot of benefits. It has a lot of security, of money and renting. Consistency, because there's still the demand, right? Massive housing shortage since the Second World War, which isn't going away. But you just now have to do it right, and I think the combination of knowledge, execution, combined together, which I think what PIN and SI and our teams are, and who work for us, are looking to achieve, and actually caring and I'm going to use it, giving a shit. I don't know whether people are I'm gonna get iced out with using that word, but if we can do that and change a few lives, that's what we set out to do with our businesses. But it's all I can say for everybody is Christmas is just around the corner. I really appreciate your time, Simon, and it's always a pleasure. And
I just realised, Chris, I made a massive misquote there. I said, welcome 1982. Of course, I meant 1984, George Orwell, not 1982. But we might have to edit that out.
Yeah, we're going to edit that. Anyway, you're fallible. You're fallible.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and this is live, right? So there you go. But still, well, look, Chris, thank you for asking me on your Christmas special. I'm wishing you a happy Christmas and a happy New Year. Very prosperous. I know you're doing some really interesting, some pioneering stuff in Bali. So I look forward to hearing more about that next year. And long may the connection between PIN and sourcing investments continue. So thanks for asking me on this session.
You're very welcome. Thank you very much. And everybody else, have a great Christmas. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Wow. I'm sure you'll agree there was heaps of value in that conversation. If you haven't already registered to the platform, head over to sourcinginvestments.co.uk. You can register as an agent, an investor, or even both. Now, if you have any questions at all, please feel free to reach out to us. You can find us on admin@sourcinginvestments.co.uk, or you can contact myself on bonnie@sourcinginvestments.co.uk. And with that, the team and I join together in wishing you a very Merry Christmas and a happy and prosperous 2026. Until the next episode, take care. Bye for now.